Let me read to you a passage from the 19th chapter of St. Matthew's Gospel, verses 3 to 12. It's the Gospel for Friday of the 19th week in Ordinary Time. St. Matthew writes, "Some Pharisees approached Jesus and tested him, saying, 'Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any cause whatever?' He said in reply, 'Have you not read that from the beginning the Creator made them male and female, and said, For this reason a man shall leave his father and mother, and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh? So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, no human being must separate.' They said to him, 'Then why did Moses command that the man give the woman a bill of divorce and dismiss her?' He said to them, 'Because of the hardness of your hearts Moses allowed you to divorce your wives, but from the beginning it was not so. I say to you, whoever divorces his wife, unless the marriage is unlawful, and marries another, commits adultery.'" That's from Matthew chapter 19, verses 3 to 12. What does it suggest to us? Well, of course, it speaks about marriage. What do I mean? Well, one of the most important of Hegel's philosophical works is his Phenomenology of Spirit. In the self-consciousness chapter, there is the first subsection entitled Independent and Dependent Self-Consciousness, Lordship and Bondage. In that section, there is the famous master-slave dialectic, which is widely understood to be a key element in Hegel's philosophical system, and has heavily influenced many subsequent philosophers. It narrates in story form the encounter between two self-conscious beings who engage in a struggle to the death before one enslaves the other. The I, the self, sees another I or self, and finds its own preeminence and control compromised. It ignores this other, or sees it as a threat to itself. The only means of reasserting itself in order to proceed towards self-consciousness is by entering into a struggle for preeminence. Well, let us not go further into Hegel's influential philosophy. He is widely credited with having provided Karl Marx with his basic dialectical system. Some have suggested that his idea also provided the inspiration for Kierkegaard's conception of man's sinful bondsman relationship with God. Others have seen an influence on Friedrich Nietzsche's ideas about master morality and slave morality. The point of my introducing Hegel here is not to discuss an important current in philosophical thought, but to show the dominance of struggle and antagonism in an important line of modern thought. Struggle is seen as a key to the universe and to all of reality. It is the fundamental given, the starting point, the initial law of the world. Now, it is not difficult to see why struggle and antagonism would be taken as the central dynamic of all things, because life involves a constant struggle, and struggle for survival and for dominance is to be seen everywhere. But it is a bad philosophy, and in any case it suggests that the life of the world must involve struggle against the other, antagonism, and the quest for dominance. But this is not the law of the universe as implanted in creation by the Creator. The basic law of creation is communion. We must start not with antagonism but with communion. It is when communion breaks down that there is antagonism, a struggling against the other, and a seeking for dominance. The struggle that Hegel lighted on is a symptom of a breakdown from how things were made and meant to be. We must start from and look for communion in and among things. What do we see? Everywhere things seek to unite. At the level of the tiniest neutron, there is a system of unity, of interconnectedness in action. Living things depend on one another, and in the animal world, animals generally live and act in concert with their kind. The newborn finds itself being protected by its parent, and it instinctively seeks to be with its parent and its own kind. The imprint of communion is everywhere. The universe gives the impression of being a system, and not just a vast disconnection. In this it bears the imprint of its maker. The maker of the world is not an antagonistic being who causes antagonism and disunity in all that he does or makes. He causes communion. The struggling against and all the antagonism must have come from somewhere else. It is a great noxious weed that brings unhappiness and that has appeared from the beginning. When we look at man, he is born into and for communion. He is born precisely into a family, and that family derives from a marriage. And marriage is the most natural thing in the world, and it is a communion of persons. Man's happiness is found in communion. The struggle of life is above all a struggle not for dominance, but for communion, for love, and for mutual respect. Well, let this be our backdrop in pondering our Lord's words on marriage and its unbreakable bond. In the Gospel passage I read earlier, in the beginning, God made man male and female, our Lord reminds his listeners. He implanted in the very constitution of the human being a structure of communion, giving to it the natural impulse to the unity of one flesh of marriage. So our Lord said, they are no longer two but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, no human being must separate. Marriage is meant by God, our Lord tells us, to be an indissoluble communion of persons. It is then the great sign of the communion which ought to exist among men and between God and man. Every married couple has the mission of bearing witness to the vocation to communion which belongs to man. This natural vocation is raised to a new dignity in the sacrament of matrimony, instituted by Christ, in which the married couple is a sign and a channel of the love which Christ has for his church. Let us strive not to struggle against others or against God, but to be in communion with others and with God. Let this be the law of every marriage, and let every marriage be a sign of the communion which ought to prevail among men everywhere.